boom, pow, wow. Does anybody know where those action words have ever came from? Well, raise your hand if you've ever read a comic book before. Now raise your hand if you've ever read a Marvel or DC comic book before. Both of these comic books have created stepping stones into American pop culture. And today, I am going to inform you about the history of comic books. I am positive that everyone here has their own favorite superhero and supervillain based upon the universe of comics. However, I promise you that by the end of this, you will be acknowledged a better understanding around the history of comic books. So why comic books? Well, comic books were for pure entertainment and storytelling. They were created to persuade and encourage new behaviors in readers. In fact, my research will help you understand how comic books became so popular in American pop culture. Comic books have a wide range of sections like action, adventure, romance, and so on. As we take a deeper look into comic book history, we'll discover the ultimate universes of comics. First, I will discuss the different eras in comic book history. Second, I will discuss how popular American pop culture got in throughout World War II. And finally, I will talk about how comic books created a fan fiction toward the idea of American pop culture. Let's jump into the first point and discuss the eras of comic book history. The different eras of the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Modern Age. Comic books during the Golden Age, which was between 1920s and 1950s, were mainly seen as newspaper strips as standalone comics. They were just mainly used for comedy and not for anything else, not until much later. In 1920 to 1930s, the American people had a very hard time. They were just getting over World War I and being pressured into World War II. In the art phase entitled The History of Comics Decade by Decade, last updated February 5th, 2013, the most significant event of the 1930s could be summed up as the undies of the outside. In the years between the cover dates of June 1938 and May 1939, the two most important characters in history of comics first appeared, which were Superman and Batman, According to Fisher Peterson and How American History Created This American Superhero, which was published on March 9, 2016, the origins of comics were tied up into World War II, and they talked directly about the war, the Nazis, and rationalizing. On March 1941, Captain America, first issues in the United States during World War II, was the first ever superhero to come around in the American pop universe. Comic books at that area were starting to become more colorful versus the more black and white that you've seen versus in 1920s. During the Silver Age between 1956 and 1970, and as well as the Bronze Age from 1970 to 1985, grew to become the highlight of American superheroes. And the most common comic book that a lot of people was reading during that time was Fantastic Four. According to Jesse Kowalski, creator of exhibits Norman Rockwell Museum of Comic Book 2010, the Bronze Age signaled a more realistic style within the comic book's younger generation of artists. And the Bronze Age marked a very powerful artwork skills. A lot of different artists came out, a lot of different storytellings came out, and everything was starting to become a higher and higher grade of stuff. Finally, in the modern age, 1985 to present, presented a larger publishing houses like Marvel and DC to come as more commercialized firms. A lot more different characters were created to help grab a broader network of ages, and as well as in today's society, The Walking Dead, The Preacher, Lucifer, Daredevil are comic books that grew into television shows and movies. Now, let's move on and discuss the second point and talk about how comic books have got so popular through the decade of World War II. Comic books during World War II created a sense of good versus evil. With the creation of Captain America, children were influenced to become soldiers for the United States Army. Before the war, children were not able to buy or sell or do anything with comic books, and that market for comic sales suffered alongside the economy. Not until after December 20th, 1940, comics hit the shelves again and broke the market, creating a significant outcome in the United States. A surrounding economy like that grew so big, and according to Eric Mazelke, this is why World War II troops that thankful the rise of the comics posted on October 17, 2018, despite comic books, reputation of pulpy kids fiction troops at the time became the primary consumers, and comics were perfect for rucksack stuffers. Comic books were such a huge hit during and after the war. In fact, the creation of superheroes created miracles for children. Like superheroes, the readers became a symbol of American nationalism, and since World War II, Marvel Comics and DC Comics have become the most popular publishing firms in the United States. Lastly, let's talk about how American pop culture got so big. Raise your hand if you believe that comic books are in the idea of American pop culture. Okay, so comic books created a stepping stone into the fan fiction, Comic-Con, and films seen around all over the world. Today, according to Ben Kirby, publisher of 40 Movies You Probably Didn't Know You Were Comic Books, posted February 10, 2014, comic books adaptations have endured the big screen for more than 7 years, and some have been famous like The Avengers and Flash, some infamous like Jonah Hex, and some entirely unfamous. Did you know the movie Wanted, played by Angela Jolie and James McAvoy, was a comic book first? A lot of comic books created superheroes, an atmosphere called fan fiction. And fan fiction is created by writers who made characters that brought into movies, into television shows. In fact, superhero comics have created special events like Comic-Con where all ages of kinds of people and fans can share the same interest. According to Comic-Con International San Diego, over the years, Comic-Con has become the focal point for the world comic conventions. Comic books have been getting a lot of heat over the last few decades and have been showing a big market of collecting. Did you know that the first ever action comic, came out in 1938, first appearance of Superman, is worth over $3.2 million. And you know what? That is crazy to say, but you know what? Comic books are just not only used for profit money only. Everybody loves to read comics. In conclusion, I have shared with you how comic books created a popular uprising into the American pop culture. And with that said, I hope you are ready to become part of the American pop culture comic fan universe. As that saying, I hope that you